Grand Rising. It is noon o'clock. Soda water. Goji berry. Can't say that because, you know, there might be children. But you know how parents do that thing where they like spell it out even though their kids can still spell? I just did that to y'all. So got a nice little stack of books here. Hey, Jersey girl. Hi, you hang out with me while I read? These are my sexuality, anthropology / pleasure philosophy books. I read these back in 2019, and I revisited the Ethical Slut again in 2020. Like that one I took like a year to go through, because it's got like workbook type situations in there. And then, actually, I think I started that one in like 2019, yeah, March 2019. These are the books that I'm going to be revisiting this month / the first quarter of the year. I haven't reread them in going on 5 years now, so I'm really looking forward to that. But today, I forgot I turned this off. Today, we're going to return to Bell Hooks, Teaching to Transgress. Where did my lighter go? And after that book, it's only 200 pages and we're on chapter 4. After that, I'm going to read her book, Teaching Critical Thought, and then, which I haven't read, and I don't think I have that PDF. I haven't seen it. So, but I'm going to check out the library because we love the library. And there's this app, which I'm excited to try. It's called Libby. And you could use your library card, and it connects, obviously, to your local library. And then you can read, like, it's like Kindle or whatever, but through the library on your phone or mobile device or laptop, whatever. Super cool. Very excited to try it out. But, okay, that's dope. Then after Teaching Critical Thought, I want to read her book, Teaching Community. All of this is going towards this curriculum that I've been working on, but none of you are here for that. We are here at page 45, chapter 4, Bell Hooks, Teaching to Transgress. Jersey, my love, are you okay? You just want to do your chewing. That's okay. All right. Nothing's going on. Really done. There's nothing happening. There's some hair in your eye. All right. Chapter 4. This is a playful dialogue with myself, Gloria Watkins, talking with Bell Hooks, my writing voice. I wanted to speak about Paolo and his work in this way, for it afforded me an intimacy, a familiarity I do not find it possible to achieve in the essay. And here I have found a way to share the sweetness, the solidarity I talk about. Watkins. Reading your books, Ain't I a Woman? Black Woman in Feminism, Feminist Theory, From Margin to Center, and Talking Back, it is clear that your development as a critical thinker has been greatly influenced by the work of Paulo Freire. Can you speak about why his work has touched your life so deeply? Hooks. Years before I met Paulo Freire, I had learned so much from his work, learned new ways of thinking about social reality that were liberatory. Often when university students and professors read Freire, they approach his work from a voyeuristic standpoint, where as they read, they see two locations in the work. The subject position of Freire the educator, whom they are more often interested in than the ideas or subjects he speaks about, and the oppressed/marginalized groups he speaks about. In relation to these two subject positions, they position themselves as observers, as outsiders. When I came to Freire's work, just at that moment in my life when I was beginning to question deeply and profoundly the politics of domination, the impact of racism, sexism, class exploitation, and the kind of domestic colonization that takes place in the United States, I felt myself to be deeply identified with the marginalized peasants he speaks about, or with my black brothers and sisters, my comrades in Guinea-Bissau. You see, I was coming from a rural southern black experience into the university, and I had lived through the struggle of racial desegregation and was in resistance without having a political language to articulate the process. Paulo was one of the thinkers whose work gave me a language. He made me think deeply about the construction of an identity in resistance. There was this one sentence of Freire's that became a revolutionary mantra for me. We cannot enter the struggle as objects in order to later become subjects. Really, it is difficult to find words adequate to explain how this statement was like a locked door, and I struggled within myself to find the key. And that struggle engaged me in a process of critical thought that was transformative. This experience positioned Freire in my mind and heart as a challenging teacher whose work furthered my own struggle against the colonizing process, the colonizing mindset. Gloria Watkins. In your work, you indicate an ongoing concern with the process of decolonization, particularly as it affects African Americans living within the white supremacist culture of the United States. Do you see a link between the process of decolonization and Freire's focus on conscientization, conscientization. 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 The question was, do you see a link between the process of decolonization and Freire's focus on that? Bell hooks. Oh, absolutely. Because the colonizing forces are so powerful in this white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, it seems that Black people are always having to renew a commitment to a decolonizing. Because the colonizing forces are so powerful in this white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, it seems that Black people are always having to renew a commitment to a decolonizing political process that should be fundamental to our lives and is not. And so, Freire's work in its global understanding of liberation struggles always emphasizes that this is an important initial stage of transformation, that historical moment when one begins to think critically about the self and identity in relation to one's political circumstance. Again, this is one of the concepts in Freire's work and in my own work that is frequently misunderstood by readers in the United States. Many times people will say to me that I seem to be suggesting that it is enough for individuals to change how they think. And you see, even their use of the enough tells us something about the attitude they bring to this question. It has a patronizing sound, one that does not convey any heartfelt understanding of how a change in attitude, though not a completion of any transformative process, can be significant for colonized and oppressed people. Again and again, Freire has had to remind readers that he never spoke of conscientization as an end itself, but always as it is joined by meaningful praxis. What is this? Hair bothering my peripherals. In many different ways, Freire articulates this. I like when he talks about the necessity of verifying in praxis what we know in consciousness. And this is a quote. That means, and let us emphasize it, that human beings do not get beyond the concrete situation, the condition in which they find themselves, only by their consciousness or their intentions, however good those intentions may be. The possibilities that I had for transcending the narrow limits of a 5 by 2 foot cell in which I was locked after the April 1964 coup d'etat were not sufficient to change my condition as a prisoner. I was always in the cell, deprived of freedom, even if I could imagine the outside world. But on the other hand, the praxis is not blind action, deprived of intention or of finality. It is action and reflection. Men and women are human beings because they are historically constituted as beings of praxis, and in the process, they have become capable of transforming the world, of giving it meaning. End quote. I think that so many progressive political movements fail to have lasting impact in the United States precisely because there is not enough understanding of praxis. This is what touches me about Antonio Faundes asserting in Learning to Question that, quote, one of the things we learned in Chile in our early reflection on everyday life was that abstract political, religious, or moral statements did not take concrete shape in acts by individuals. We were revolutionaries in the abstract, not in our daily lives. It seems to me essential that in our individual lives we should day to day live out what we affirm. End quote. It always astounds me when progressive people act as though it is somehow a naive moral position to believe that our lives must be a living example of our politics. Gloria Watkins. It always astounds me when progressive people act as though, there are many readers of Freire who feel that the sexist language in his work, which went unchanged even after the challenge of contemporary feminist movement and feminist critique, is a negative example. When you first read Freire, what was your response to the sexism of his language? Bell hooks. There has never been a moment when reading Freire that I have not remained aware of not only the sexism of the language, but the way he, like other progressive third world political leaders, intellectuals, critical thinkers such as Fanon, Memmi, etc., constructs a phallocentric paradigm of liberation, wherein freedom and the experience of patriarchal manhood are always linked as though they are one and the same. For me, this is always a source of anguish, for it represents a blind spot in the vision of men who have profound insight. And yet I never wish to see a critique of this blind spot overshadow anyone's, and feminists in particular, capacity to learn from the insights. There is a way, or this is why it is difficult for me to speak about sexism in Freire's work. It is difficult to find a language that offers a way to frame critique and yet maintain the recognition of all that is valued and respected in the work. It seems to me that the binary opposition that is so much embedded in Western thought and language makes it nearly impossible to project a complex response. I feel that so hard, Belle. Yes. But this is why we're reading Belle, because she's my girl. The way she's talking about Paulo, I thought about her when I first encountered her work. But I never had a problem with like sexist language because in my mind, Belle's perfect. I really have yet to come across like a conclusion or thought process of hers that I don't even like, that I haven't resonated with, like, or experienced even. There's some like that, like I didn't go through desegregation, but I definitely went to a racist school. So I can empathize even with like the remnants of her experience. So I feel particularly blessed because we've had so many great elders. We have so many fantastic forerunners and ancestors. And a lot of people have their problems, but I don't know, there's so many admirable Black women that are just so profound. And I don't even want to be redundant by like adding a bunch of adjectives, but bell hooks is one of them. So Freire's sexism is indicated by the language in his early works, notwithstanding that there is so much that remains liberatory. There is no need to apologize for the sexism. Freire's own model of critical pedagogy invites a critical interrogation of this flaw in the work. A critical interrogation is not the same as dismissal. Gloria Watkins. So you see no contradiction in your valuing of Freire's work and your commitment to feminist scholarship. Bell hooks. It is feminist thinking that empowers me to engage in a constructive critique of Freire's work, which I needed so that as a young reader of his work, I did not passively absorb the worldview presented. And yet there are many other standpoints from which I approached his work that enable me to experience its value, that make it possible for me, for that work to touch me at the very core of my being. In talking with academic feminists, usually white women, who feel they must either dismiss or devalue the work of Freire because of sexism, I see clearly how our different responses are shaped by the standpoint that we bring to the work. I come to Freire thirsty, dying of thirst in that way that the colonized, marginalized subject who is still unsure of how to break the hold of the status quo, who longs for change, is needy and is thirsty. Oh, there was something else before I wanted to highlight, but I'll go back and I found in his work and the work of Malcolm X and Fanon, etc., a way to quench that thirst. To have work that promotes one's liberation is such a powerful gift that it does not matter so much if that gift is flawed. Think of the work as water that contains some dirt. Because you are thirsty, you are not too proud to extract the dirt and be nourished by the water. For me, this is an experience that corresponds very much to the way individuals of privilege respond to the use of water in the first world context. When you are privileged, living in one of the richest countries in the world, you can waste resources. And you can especially justify your disposal of something that you consider impure. Look at what most people do with water in this country. Many people purchase special water because they consider tap water unclean. And of course, this purchasing is a luxury. Even our ability to see the water that comes through the tap as unclean is itself informed by an imperialist consumer perspective. I would add that it is also informed by a knowledge at this day and age, because it was written in 94, and at that time it wasn't as common to realize how, I don't even know if it was uncommon, because bell hooks should definitely know how fucked up the government was, and absolutely with our food and water sources. But I would say that it doesn't just come from the consumer perspective, but it comes from like well, maybe it is. I don't know what she means by consumer, because maybe it's consumption by like the intake of a thing. But I think originally I read it as like her saying capitalism specifically, like which I guess is the problem, but like engaging in like consumer culture where you always are buying things, so only coming from like, oh, I only drink like Avion, and I understand that critique, but I'm saying I think that I don't see a difference between tap water and bottled water, even though I always steal my water. I refuse to pay for water. I hate that I have to pay for water. I don't drink from my tap water to keep my water bill low, and also because we definitely have lead pipes here in Cincinnati. So, I don't know. And then like Flint, Michigan, they literally can't drink their water, so they have to buy bottled water. So I do think there's like a level here of like eco-justice that goes like unspoken about, but I do think that bell hooks would absolutely agree with me on that. And I also think that she would agree that economic or environmental justice is feminist justice is part of decolonization, because you cannot have decolonization unless we address the land. It always comes back to land. It started with land. The land. We must give back to the land. That's where I keep circling back to. Future projects coming with that. Don't worry, I'm just waiting out this snowstorm. And also, it's like, you don't want to just pick up shit and then throw it away. It's like, throwing away shit isn't getting rid of a thing. Like, that doesn't solve a problem. Like, everything is just like being prolonged. Like, that did not help the earth digest, right? Like, that's not, you see that a lot with tourism. Like, anytime you motherfuckers be going to like Cozumel and shit, and I love Cozumel, beautiful place. But then I go with some locals and we go see the actual, rest of the island, and tons, literal tons, like in weight of pounds of trash. Or not pounds, like just tons of the literal tons of objects of trash in the jungle. Multiple people living out of homes made of garbage, like garbage bags and such. Beautiful people. And they live a lot together, a lot of them, in these little shacks on this beautiful land just full of garbage. Because you can't just take trash off an island. There's like 30 cruises coming in every fucking day. I hate cruises. I'll never go on one. The way they kill the earth and the world. But tourism is the problem. And then we use the tools of the master on our own selves. And then we use it on each other. Because that's the way you gotta make the dollar. And that's hustle culture. And that's urgency culture. And that's the toxicity behind black on black crime. And all that other fucking nonsense. Anyway. Tap water. Even our ability to see the water that comes through the tap as unclean is itself informed by an imperialist consumer perspective. It is an expression of luxury and not just simply a response to the condition of water. If we approach the drinking of water that comes from the tap from a global perspective, we would have to talk about it differently. We would have to consider what the vast majority of the people in the world who are thirsty must do to obtain water. Paolo's work has been living water for me. Gloria Watkins. To what extent do you think your experience as an African American has made it possible for you to relate to Freire's work? Bell hooks. As I already suggested, growing up in a rural area in the agrarian South, among Black people who worked the land, I felt intimately linked to the discussion of peasant life in Freire's work and its relation to literacy. There are no history books that really tell the story of how difficult the politics of everyday life was for Black people in the racially segregated South, when so many folks did not read and were so often dependent on racist people to explain, to read, and to write. And I was among a generation learning those skills with an accessibility to education that was still new. The emphasis on education as necessary for liberation that Black people made in slavery and then on into Reconstruction informed our lives. And so Freire's emphasis on education as the practice of freedom made such immediate sense to me. Conscious of the need for literacy from girlhood, I took with me to the university memories of reading to folks, of writing for folks. I took with me memories of Black teachers in the segregated Black schools, or the segregated school system, who had been critical pedagogues providing us liberatory paradigms. It was this early experience of a liberatory education in Booker T. Washington and Crispus Attucks, the Black schools of my formative years, that made me forever dissatisfied with the education I received in predominantly white settings. As it was educators like Freire who affirmed that the difficulties I had with the banking system of education, with an education that in no way addressed my social reality, were an important critique. Returning to the discussion of feminism sexism, I want to say that I felt myself included in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, one of the first fairy books I read, in a way that I never felt myself. In my experience as a rural Black person, included in the first feminist books I read, works like The Feminine Mystique and Born Female. Yeah, I've totally relate with that. Because them early feminist books, they don't make no sense for no, you can't, as a Black woman, you can't fit into the conversation. It seems so shallow and petty in different ways that I don't really care to unpack right now. In the United States, we do not talk enough about the way in which class shapes our perspective on reality. Since so many of the early feminist books really reflected a certain type of white bourgeoisie sensibility, this work did not touch many Black women deeply. Not because we did not recognize the common experiences women share, but because those commonalities were mediated by profound differences in our realities created by the politics of race and class. Gloria Watkins. Can you speak about the relationship between Freire's work and the development of your work as feminist theorist and social critic? Bell Hooks. Unlike feminist thinkers who make a clear separation between the work of feminist pedagogy and Freire's work and thought, for me, these two experiences converge. Deeply committed to feminist pedagogy, I find that, much like weaving a tapestry, I have taken threads of Paulo's work and woven it into that version of feminist pedagogy I believe my work as writer and teacher embodies. Again, I want to assert that it was the intersection of Paulo's thought and the lived pedagogy of many Black teachers of my girlhood, most of them women, who saw themselves as having a liberatory mission of to educate us in a manner that would prepare us to effectively resist racism and white supremacy. That has had a profound impact on my thinking about the art and practice of teaching. And though these Black women did not openly advocate feminism, if they even knew the word, the very fact that they insisted on academic excellence and open critical thought for young Black females was an anti-sexist practice. Gloria Watkins. Be more specific about the work you have done that has been influenced by Freire. Bell Hooks. Let me say that I wrote Ain't I a Woman, Black Woman, and Feminism when I was an undergraduate, though it was not published until years later. This book was the concrete manifestation of my struggle with the question of moving from object to subject, the very question Paulo had posed. And it is so easy now that many, if not most, feminist scholars are willing to recognize the impact of race and class as factors that shape female identity, for everyone to forget that early on feminist movement was not a location that welcomed the radical struggle of Black women to theorize our subjectivity. Freire's work and that of many other teachers affirmed my right as a subject in resistance to define my reality. His writing gave me a way to place the politics of racism in the United States in a global context, wherein I could see my fate linked with that of colonized Black people everywhere, struggling to decolonize, to transform society. More than in the work of many white bourgeois feminist thinkers, there was always in Paulo's work recognition of the subject position of those most disenfranchised, those who suffer the gravest weight of oppressive forces, with the exception of his not acknowledging always the specific gendered realities of oppression and exploitation. This was a standpoint which affirmed my own desire to work from a lived understanding of the lives of poor Black women. There has been, only in recent years, a body of scholarship in the United States that does not look at the lives of Black people through a bourgeoisie lens, a fundamentally radical scholarship that suggests that indeed the experience of Black people, Black females, might tell us more about the experience of women in general than simply an analysis that looks first and foremost and always at those women who reside in privileged locations. One of the reasons that Paulo's book, Pedagogy and Process, the letters to Guinea-Bissau, has been important for my work is that it is a critical example of how a privileged critical thinker approaches sharing knowledge and resources with those who are in need. Here is Paulo at one of those insightful moments. He writes, quote, "Authentic help means that all who are involved help each other mutually, growing together in the common effort to understand the reality which they seek to transform. Only through such praxis, in which those who help and those who are being helped help each other simultaneously, can the act of helping become the distortion in which the helper dominates the helped." That's so true. Though, I'll read it again in case that was hard. Only through such praxis. Praxis is a beautiful word because it's a little deeper than practice. So when you practice something, you don't necessarily critique and question it, right? You practice swinging the bat at the ball. You don't really be like, what if I swung it with my feet? Or came up with a new way to do this, right? You like practice the swing. Praxis, in my mind, how I understand it, maybe I'm completely wrong. I don't know, this is how I've always understood it and used the word, was something that's a lifestyle. You engage with, you question, you reevaluate, and it's living, it's growing, it's evolving, right? It's doing some kind of evolution, right? You can like trace things back and see a lineage. You can find a history. You can find a process, a pattern, a thread, a tapestry. It weaves itself into a larger picture. Yeah. Only through such praxis, in which those who help and those who are being helped help each other simultaneously, can the act of helping become free from that distortion that we typically experience, where the helper dominates the help. Like a nonprofit can only exist when they're leeching off their served population. That is a beautiful example. Or like people who have kids just because they want kids. In American society, where the intellectual, and specifically the Black intellectual, has often assimilated and betrayed revolutionary concerns in the interest of maintaining class power, it is crucial and necessary for insurgent Black intellectuals to have an ethics of struggle that informs our relationship to those Black people who have not had access to ways of knowing, shared in locations of privilege. That has always been my general life goal, because if it wasn't for my local library, I wouldn't be here right now. And I've always my goal with my artwork has always been to how do I get my bus driver to be able to see this, to want to engage with this? How do I get Miss Geraldine to feel safe, secure, welcome, interested, or even ideally comforted by this piece? How do I get her in that space? Because that's step one. And then everything else, all those other questions of those emotions or how to build a connection, that is whole other steps. But you gotta unpack, you gotta untangle, you gotta witness, you know what I mean? You gotta witness. Laura Watkins. Comment, if you will, on Freire's willingness to be critiqued, especially by feminist thinkers. Bell hooks. In so much of Paula's work, there is a generous spirit, a quality of open-mindedness that I feel is often missing from intellectual and academic arenas in U.S. society, and feminist circles have not been an exception. Of course, Paolo seems to grow more open as he ages. I, too, feel myself more strongly committed to a practice of open-mindedness, a willingness to engage critique as I age. And I think the way we experience more profoundly the growing fascism in the world, even in so-called liberal circles, reminds us that our lives and our work must be an example. In Freire's work, in the last few years, there are many responses to the critiques made of his writing. And there is that lovely critical exchange between him and Antonio Foundes in learning to question on the question of language, on Paulo's work in Guinea-Bissau. I learned from this example, from seeing his willingness to struggle non-defensively in print, naming shortcomings of insight, changes in thought, and new critical reflections. Gloria Watkins. What was it like for you to interact personally with Paulo Freire? Bell Hooks. For me, our meeting was incredible. It made me a devoted student and comrade of Paulo's for life. Let me tell you this story. Some years ago now, Paulo was invited to the University of Santa Cruz, where I was then a student and teacher. He came to do workshops with third world students and faculty and to give a public lecture. I had not heard even a whisper that he was coming, though many folks knew how much his work meant to me. Then somehow I found out that he was coming only to be told that all the slots were filled for participants in the workshop. I protested, and in the ensuing dialogue I was told that I had not been invited to the various meetings for fear that I would disrupt the discussion of more important issues by raising feminist critiques. Even though I was allowed to participate when someone dropped out at the last minute, my heart was heavy because already I felt that there had been this sexist attempt to control my voice, to control the encounter. So of course this created a war within myself because indeed I did want to interrogate Paulo Freire personally about the sexism in his work. And so with courtesy, I forged ahead at the meeting. Immediately, individuals spoke against me, raising 3 questions and devalued their importance. Paulo intervened to say that these questions were crucial, and he addressed them. Truthfully, I loved him at this moment for exemplifying by his actions the principles of his work. So much would have changed for me had he tried to silence or belittle a feminist critique. And it was not enough for me that he owned his sexism. I want to know why he had not seen that this aspect of earlier work be changed. He responded to in writing by him. Oh, wait. I read that wrong. And it was not enough for me that he owned his sexism. I want to know why he had not seen that this earlier aspect of earlier work be changed, be responded to in writing by him. And he spoke then about making more of a public effort to speak and write on these issues. This has been evident in his later work. Gloria Watkins. Were you more affected by his presence than his work? Bell Hooks. Another great teacher of mine, even though we have not met, is the Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. And he says in The Raft is Not the Shore that great humans bring with them something that is hollowed atmosphere, something like a hollowed atmosphere. And when we seek them out, then we feel peace, we feel love, and we feel courage. His words appropriately define what it was like for me to be in the presence of Paulo. I spend hours alone with him, talking, listening to music, eating ice cream at my favorite cafe. Seriously, Thich Nhat Hanh teaches that a certain milieu is born at the same time as a great teacher. And he says, when you, the teacher, come and stay 1 hour with us, you bring that milieu. It is though you bring a candle into the room. The candle is there. There is a kind of light zone you bring in. When a sage is there and you sit near him, you feel light, you feel peace. The lesson I learned from witnessing Paulo embody the practice he describes in theory was profound. It entered me in a way that writing can never touch me, and it gave me courage. It has not been easy for me to do the work I do and reside in the academy. Lately, I think it has become almost impossible. But one is inspired to persevere by the witness of others. Freire's presence inspired me, and it was not that I did not see sexist behavior on his part, only that these contradictions are embraced as part of the learning process, part of what one struggles to change, and that struggle is often protracted. That's called grace, baby. Gloria Watkins, have you anything more to say about Freire's response to feminist critique? Bell Hooks, I think it important and significant that despite feminist critiques of his work, which are often harsh, Paulo recognizes that he must play a role in feminist movements. This he declares in Learning to Question. Quote, if the women are critical, they have to accept our contribution as men, as well as the workers have to accept our contribution as intellectuals. Because it is a duty and right that I have to participate in the transformation of society. Then if the women must have the main responsibility in their struggle, they have to know that their struggle also belongs to us. That is, to those men who don't accept the machista position in the world. The same is true of racism. As an apparent white man, because I always say that I am not quite sure of my whiteness, the question is to know if I am really against racism in a radical way. If I am, then I have a duty and a right to fight with black people against racism. Gloria Watkins, does Freire continue to influence your work? There is not the constant mention of him in your latest work as was the case with your first books. Bell Hooks, though I may not quote Freire as much, he still teaches me. When I read Learning to Question, just at a time when I had begun to engage in critical reflections on black people in exile, there was so much there about the experience of exile that helped me. And I was thrilled with the book. It had a quality of that dialogue that is a true gesture of love that Paulo speaks about in other work. So it was from reading this book that I decided that it would be useful to do a dialogical work with the philosopher Cornel West. We have what Paulo calls a talking book. Breaking Bread. Of course, my great wish is to do such a book with Paulo, and then for some time I have been working on essays of death and dying, particularly African American ways of dying. Then just quite serendipitously, I was searching for an epigraph for this work and came across these lovely passages from Paulo that echo so intimately my own worldview that it was as though, to use an old Southern phrase, my tongue was in my friend's mouth. He writes, quote, I like to live my life intensely. I am the type of person who loves his life passionately. Of course, someday I will die, but I have the impression that when I die, I will die intensely as well. I will die experimenting with life, with myself intensely. For this reason, I am going to die with an immense longing for life, since this is the way I have been giving. Gloria Watkins, yes, I can hear you saying those very words. Any last comments? Bell Hooks, only that words seem to be not good enough to evoke all that I have learned from Paulo. Our meeting had that quality of sweetness that lingers, that lasts for a lifetime. Even if you never speak to that person again, see their face, you can always return in your heart to that moment when you were together, to be renewed. That is profound solidarity. Aww. So cute. That's the end of chapter 4. I don't feel like using this format anymore because I just don't like the way that feels. Which one do we want to read? We want to start over. Pleasure Activism by my living, loving icon. The first person to start me on this journey of everybody else. Adrienne Marie Brown. Politics of Feeling Good. Or Ethical Slut, 3rd edition. I think this is the one I want to start with. Because pleasure activism is kind of like, it's already my lifestyle. I'm not saying I definitely can't learn from this, I'm just saying, this is one of those things that I just like return to, and I like take big chunks out of as like proof and data for my curriculum. I don't know why I'm telling you all this, because it's not like I'm gonna explain it to you. Because you gotta let it brew, babe. You gotta let it, you know, I'm not gonna like bring out the cake half baked, babe. Like, that's just, we're not doing that. What you're doing right now is you're getting a taste of the batter. You're welcome, okay? My toes are cold, so sometimes my nose runs, but it's fine. If that grossed you out, then you probably don't want to stay for this next part of the Ethical Slut. Because listen, baby, fluids be fluiding, okay? Are you even still recording? Let's take a pause and see. Look, I got tissues. There you go. My mom gave me a bunch of these. I think like her church got a snack pack or something. They're pretty good. I am a vegan, so I be liking that stuff. I love soda water so much. Okay, let's get comfy. Whew. Crack my hip. Oh, thank you, Jesus. Oh. Oh. This is Rhett. It's Winnie. Cricket. Started doing kickboxing right here. It's from the, you know what I mean? Woo! Oh, sometimes you just gotta take a break from your chilling, you know what I mean? Lifestyle. That book is why I started Slink. Well, not why. It affirmed my launch. That came out in 2018. And I read it right when the lockdown happened in 2019. And that's when Slink was born in 21, when we were traveling again. I was like, I am never having a job again. And I haven't. I've got contracts, stipends, commissions, residencies, a 2-year fellowship, paid for my master's and gave me a living stipend. But I won't tie myself to the system of colonization, and I won't be gaslit by an entire society that I'm like already critiquing. That was kind of like my final straw. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm committing to this work then in myself. So every time I'm like, I feel like a shoulda, coulda, woulda coming on, I'm gonna sit with that, and I'm gonna tell everybody to shut the fuck up, sit the fuck down, fuck off respectfully, while I tap in was, look, ain't nobody responsible for me but me. And that is real. There's a liberation and a terror. So come to terms and don't rush your process, right? Don't be the first to betray yourself. Discipline is pleasure. Everybody's hurt. Be gentle. You know what I'm saying? And then I actually I got this book when I was still, I think I was still dating my first boyfriend. I was a late bloomer, but I always knew I was into alternative stuff. I got the retwist and I'm chilling here. I keep forgetting I got the retwist. It's alright. First retwist ever. I shaved my head off. All my hair off. 3.5 years ago. That's where we at. We're good. What's in that ass? Shea butter, baby. Alright. I feel like for y'all, I would like to read the whole book. But for me, I'd like to go to chapter 15 through 18 because I just got out of a relationship in that structure because we're restructuring, and I'd like to read these chapters because they're a little more based around restructuring and conflict stuff. And this is for me. And it's for you. What I'm gonna do is brush up on chapter 1, chapter 11, and then we'll go to chapter 16. That's our plan. That's our roadmap. That feels good to me. Great. Chapter 1. Who is an ethical slut? Many people dream of having an abundance of love and sex and friendship. Some believe that such a life is impossible and settle for less than they want, feeling always a little lonely and a little frustrated. Others try to achieve their dreams but are thwarted by outside social pressures or by their own emotions and decide that such dreams must stay in the realm of fantasy. A few, though, persist and discover that being openly loving, intimate, and sexual with many people is not only possible but can be more rewarding than they ever imagined. People have been succeeding at free love for many centuries, often quietly without much fanfare. In this book, we will share the techniques, the skills, and the ideals that have made it work for them. So who is an ethical slut? We are. Many, many others are. Maybe you are too. If you dream of freedom, if you dream of intimacy, both hot and profound, if you dream of an abundance of friends, of flirtation and affection, of following your desires and seeing where they take you, then you've already taken the first step. Why we chose this title. From the moment you saw or heard about this book, you probably guessed that some of the terms may not have the meanings you're accustomed to. What kind of people would revel in calling themselves sluts? And why would they insist on being recognized for their ethics? In the most of the world, slut is a highly offensive term used to describe a woman whose sexuality is voracious, indiscriminate, and shameful. It's interesting to note that the analogous words stud or player used to describe a highly sexual man are often terms of approval and envy. If you ask about a man's morals, you will probably hear about his honesty, loyalty, integrity, and high principles. When you ask about a woman's morals, you are more likely to hear about whom she shares sex with and under what conditions. We have problems with this. So we are proud to reclaim the word slut as a term of approval, even endearment. To us, a slut is a person of any gender who celebrates sexuality according to the radical position that sex is nice and pleasure is good for you. Sluts may choose to have no sex at all or to get cozy with the fifth fleet. They may be heterosexual, homosexual, asexual, bisexual, radical activists, or peaceful suburbanites. As proud sluts, we believe that sex and sexual love are fundamental forces for good, activities with the potential to strengthen intimate bonds, enhance lives, open spiritual awareness, and even change the world. Furthermore, we believe that every consensual, intimate relationship has the potentials and that any erotic pathway, concisely chosen and mindfully followed, can be a positive, creative force in the lives of individuals and their communities. Sluts share their sexuality the way philanthropists share their money. Because they have a lot of it to share, because it makes them happy to share it, because sharing makes the world a better place. Sluts often find that the more love and sex they give away, the more they have. A loaves and fishes miracle in which greed and generosity go hand in hand to provide more for everybody. Imagine living in sexual abundance. About you. I will say, in that last bit, obviously this was written by a polycule here. They have children together. That last little bit is incredibly like slut as polygamy, like lensed and like trajectory oriented. I will say that the whole book isn't like that. I mean, there's undertones and like it would be wrong to say I would be wrong if I didn't say that there's not like biased undertones that are like go have multiple partners. They definitely acknowledge like non-sexual relationships and validate them as equal, and definitely talk about, things that aren't just like the multiplicity of polygamy and polyamory and all the fun implications of that. But I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't say, for me, I've picked up on undertones of like multiple sexual partners, because that's like the lifestyle. And I don't think that's bad. That's like the hand of an artist, right? Like you can always tell like your mom's cooking or something. I don't know. Maybe you can't. Maybe your mom's a shit cook, which is fine. I'm just saying. It's like a little there. You know what I'm saying? So, anyway. I just think you can live in sexual abundance and like never have traditional sex, or like be like asexual your entire life. Like be a fucking nun. You know what I mean? Like, and that's actually something the Soul of Sex talks about a lot. Sex at Dawn talks about that too, but the Soul of Sex is more about like the lifestyle, like a sexy lifestyle, written by Thomas More. Yeah, I think that's really that one is more in that vein. Anyway, about you. Maybe you dream of maintaining several long-term sexual and intimate relationships. Maybe your dream is a lot of friendships that may or may not include sex. Maybe the ideal of genital sex holds no interest for you, but you still want to form a warm, loving partnership, or 2, or 3. Maybe you want monogamy, but a kind of monogamy that you and your partner have created according to your own desires, and not the blueprint handed down by a greater culture. Maybe you want to be single, connecting where and how you want without changing your fundamental independence. Maybe you want to be part of a couple that occasionally shares a bed with a mutually desirable third party, or that takes a planned night away from monogamy every now and then. Maybe you dream of 3 or 4-way or orgiastic connections. Maybe you cherish solitude and want to find ways to get your needs met all by yourself with the occasional help of a friend or lover. Or maybe you want to explore different paths, to try a few things, to see how they feel, to see how many kinds of relating you can fit into your busy and interesting life. All these possibilities and 100 more are legitimate ways of being an ethical slut. As you read this book, you'll find that some of our ideas will be good fits for the way you want to live, and others will not. Take what you want and leave the rest. As long as you and the people you care about are consenting, growing, and taking good care of yourselves and the people around you, you're doing ethical sluthood right. So don't let someone else's opinions, including ours, tell you otherwise. About us. Between us, we represent a fairly large slice of the pie that is sexual diversity. Dosie is a therapist in private practice in San Francisco, specializing in alternative sexualities, non-traditional relationships, and therapy for trauma survivors. She has identified as queer for more than 30 years, informed by the women's and gay men's communities, and by her years of bisexuality before that. She committed to an open sexual lifestyle in 1969 when her daughter was a newborn, and taught her first workshop on unlearning jealousy in 1973. She has spent about half of her adult life living single, sort of, with families of housemates, lovers, and other intimates. She makes her home in the mountains north of San Francisco. Many of you may remember Janet from the first edition of this book as Catherine A. Lists, a pen name she used back when her sons were still minors. Now that they're grown and independent, she has gone back to using her real name. Janet lived as a teenage slut in college, but then essayed traditional monogamy in the heterosexual marriage for more than a decade. Since the end of that marriage, she has not considered monogamy an option for her. While most people would call her bisexual, she thinks of herself as gender bent and can't figure out how sexual orientation is supposed to work when you're sometimes male and sometimes female. She's married to a bio guy whose gender is as flexible as hers, which is less complicated than it sounds. She makes her living as a writer, publisher, and teacher, and lives in Eugene, Oregon. Together, we have been lovers, dear friends, co-authors, and co-conspirators for a quarter century, in and out of various other relationships, homes, and projects. We are both parents of grown children, both active in the BDSM, leather, and kink communities, and both creative writers. We think we're a great example of what can happen if you don't try to force all your relationships into the monogamous till death do us part model. Sexual adventurers. The world generally views sluts as debased, degraded, promiscuous, indiscriminate, jaded, immoral adventurers. Destructive, out of control. Oh my god. And driven by some form of psychopathology that prevents them from entering into a healthy monogamous relationship. Oh yes, and definitely not ethical. We see ourselves as people who are committed to finding a place of sanity with sex and relationships, and to freeing ourselves to enjoy sex and sexual love in as many ways as may fit for each of us. We may not always know what fits without trying it on, so we tend to be curious and adventurous. When we see someone who intrigues us, we like to feel free to respond. And as we explore our response, to discover whatever is special about this new fascinating person. We like relating to different kinds of people and reveling in how our differences expand our horizons and offer us new ways to be ourselves. Sluts are not necessarily sexual athletes, though many of us do train more than most. Most of us value sex, not as a way to set records, but for the pleasure it brings us and the good things we get to share with however many wonderful people. We love adventure. The word adventurer is sometimes used pejoratively, suggesting that the adventurous person is immature or inauthentic, not really willing to grow up and settle down into a presumably monogamous lifestyle. We wonder, what's wrong with having adventures? Can't we have adventures and still raise children, buy houses, and do the work that's important to us? Of course we can. Sluts qualify for mortgages just like everybody else. We tend to like our lives complicated, and the challenge of maintaining stable work and home lives while discovering new people and ideas is just what we need to keep us interested and engaged. One of the most valuable things we learn from open sexual lifestyles is that our programming about love, intimacy, and sex can be rewritten. When we begin to question all the ways we have been told we ought to be, we can begin to edit and rewrite our old tapes. By breaking the rules, we both free and empower ourselves. We hate boredom. We are people who are greedy to experience all that life has to offer, and we are also generous in sharing what we have to offer. We love to be the good time had by all. What's new in this edition? In the 8 years since the previous edition of The Ethical Slut was published, polyamory has become hugely more visible. This book was published This is the 3rd edition, but it's not telling me. This new edition, so the first one was released in 1997, then 2009, the 2nd edition, and this one was released in 2017. So it's still kind of old, but not that old. In the 8 years since the previous edition of The Ethical Slut was published, polyamory has become hugely more visible, which means that a very wide variety of people of all races, gender, orientations, and backgrounds are becoming interested in exploring the possibilities of relationships beyond culturally compelled monogamy. In this edition, we have done our best to speak to as wide a range of potential readers as we can. Hence, you'll find that we've given more attention to people of color, asexual, and aromantic people in their teens, early 20s, people of non-binary gender, and other groups that too often receive short shrift from sex-positive communities. A long overdue conversation about the nature and nuance of sexual consent has also moved into the forefront of the cultural dialogue. We've included a new chapter on this important topic, and just for fun, we've also added some short histories of the people and ideas that have helped make alternative sexuality what it is today. The language in this book. When you sit down to write a book about sex, as we hope you one day will, you will discover that centuries of censorship have left us with very little adequate language with which to discuss the joys and occasional worries of sex. The language that we do have often carries implicit judgments. If the only polite way to talk about sexuality is in medical Latin, vulvas and pendudas and penes and testes, are only doctors allowed to talk about sex? Is sex all about disease? Meanwhile, most of the originally English words, cock and cunt, fucking, and oh yes, slut, often have a hostile or coarse feel to them and are used as insults to degrade people in their sexuality. Euphemisms, PPs, pussies, jade gates, and mighty towers sound as if we are embarrassed, and maybe we are. Our approach to a sex-positive language is to reclaim the original English words and by using them as positive descriptors, wash them clean. Hence our adoption of the word slut, which we are proud to say has infiltrated the language in the form of slut walks and the rejection of slut shaming. You will also find in this book words like fuck and cock and cunt used, not as insults, but to mean what they actually mean. We are writing this book from a sex-positive position in the belief that we are working for a healthier and happier and safer world. We are aware also that for many people, sex has not been a positive thing in their lives, whether from cultural or religious shaming or from the exposure to sexual violence. And sometimes because for them, general sex is not what they want. Our fondest utopian visions are that when sex and love and intimacy are truly free and seen as positive forces in our lives and in the world, we will be much more able to solve the problems of rape, sexual bullying, shaming, and repression. Indeed, we hope this book contributes to a world where you won't settle for anything less than love and freedom in your sex life. Cultural blind spots can show up as centrisms, couple-centrism, heterocentrism, Eurocentrism, non-monogamy, extramarital sex, and open relationships, all define themselves by what they aren't, thus implying that there's some exception to the quote-unquote normal relationships that normal people have. There's a note in the margin. I was just trying to read it. Polyamory was coined in 1992 and is currently, we are thrilled to report, included in the Oxford English Dictionary. Formed from the Latin and Greek roots that translate as loving many, this word has been adopted by many sluts to describe their lifestyles. It is often abbreviated as poly, as in I am a poly person. Some use it to mean multiple committed live-in relationships, forms of group marriage. Others use it as an umbrella word to cover all forms of sex and love and domesticity outside of conventional monogamy. The word polyamory has moved into the language so rapidly that we think maybe the language has been waiting for it for a very long time. In this new world of sex and relationship, new terms get coined all the time to describe or attempt to describe the ever-changing spectrum of ways in which people arrange their lives. If, as you're reading, you encounter a term you don't understand, please check the glossary in the back of the book, where we've defined many of the terms for you. The first usage of each glossary term is marked like this, in bold. People often ask us why we talk so much about sex. We see sex as the elephant in the room. Huge, taking up lots of space, and too seldom included in the discourse about relationships. In this book, we will talk about many kinds of love, and we'll also talk about sexual expression in all of them. Finally, we are doing our best to make the language in this book as pansexual and gender neutral as we can. This book is for everybody. In previous editions, we switched back and forth between he and she pronouns, but in this edition, with the newly increased visibility of non-binary lifestyles and genders, we'll use the gender-neutral pronouns they, them, and their whenever possible. Pansexual means including everyone as a sexual being. Straight, bi, lesbian, gay, asexual, non-binary, trans, queer, old, young, disabled, pervert, male, female, questioning, transitioning. The examples and quotations in this book have been drawn from throughout the huge array of lifestyles we've encountered in our combined 8 decades of sluthood. There are infinite right ways to be sexual, and we want to affirm all of them. Then they have a story here by Alfred Kinsey and the Kinsey Institute from 1947. All right, that's the end of that, and that's chapter 2. So that's like the breakdown of the book, and then the next chapter I wanted to move to was chapter 11, page 99. Well, this one's on boundaries. Maybe I should read that one. I feel like I know what boundaries are, though. I'm gonna do what my original plan is. We have a roadmap. Oh, whatever this is. Oh, the kicks. Wow. Woo! Okay. Chapter 11. The Unethical Slut. Dun, dun, dun. Are my lips chapped? I feel like my lips are chapped. Earthganics. Locally made. Buy some bad bitches. Finley Market. You can buy it online though too. All plant-based. All handmade. Three little white girls. Yes. Her. The Unethical Slut. Some people treat sex as a big game hunt, trying to conquer the unwilling and unwitting victim, as though the object of their attention would never decide to share sex with them unless tricked into it. Believing that a person would have to be a fool to make love with you is often, we observe, a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is my theory of why I don't believe most Americans should be having sex. Because, one, you can't talk about it, shouldn't be having it. Two, if the human body, as it is, freaks you out, you're already disconnected from self. But then, yeah, if you think it's like, you're so insecure, that connection is never going to be anything but like manipulative and one-sided on both sides. Like you'll always be self-serving and like you're always attaching yourself from a deficit, so you're always going to be pulling too much. You're always going to be perpetuating some kind of abuse cycle, because the abused person cannot exist without the abuser. But the abuser cannot exist without a person to abuse. They feed each other. Anyway. Using sex to shore up sagging self-esteem by stealing someone else's does not work to build a solid sense of self-worth. And this thief of love will have to go on stealing more and more without ever feeling fulfilled. Such people often approach open sexual lifestyles as if keeping score. Set collectors and trophy fuckers treat their partners like prizes in a contest they have set out to win. The concept of set collectors may be new to you, but we assure you that such people exist. A friend of ours discovered that a would-be love of hers had already had sex with her mother and her sister and was hoping to complete the set. Sex that means treating your partners as collectibles does not meet our requirements for mutual respect. Some people approach scoring as if all people can be ranked on a hierarchy from the most to the least desirable, and the way to make the most points and assure yourself of a high rank is to collect partners as high up the ladder as you can reach. People gain in rank and value in these hierarchies by being thin, young, cute, gym tone, wealthy, and or of high social status. We do not believe that love is a game that you can win by scoring high on a hierarchy of shallow values. We know from extensive experience that appearance and wealth are not predictors of good loving. We try to avoid ranking people as better or worse than each other, and are unhappy with those who want to relate to our rank more than ourselves. Hierarchies produce victims on the top as well as the bottom, because it is almost as alienating to be approached by too many people for the wrong reason as it is to be approached by nobody at all. Some who have a history of non-consensual non-monogamy may get attached to the sense of secrecy, of getting away with something. These folks may have a very hard time adapting to the idea of consensual sluthood. They're so used to concealing their activities from their partners that they may even have built that furtive feeling into their erotic life, hooked on the adrenaline rush that they get from forbidden fruit. It takes a pretty substantial leap of faith, and maybe some creative fantasizing and role-playing, for such individuals to open up their hidden places and experience the greater joy that can come from knowing that nobody is getting hurt by their fun. People who refuse to learn to use barriers that get between people and viruses are not ethical sluts. They are quite simply playing dirty when they argue with lovers about allowing potentially infectious sex, insisting on sex without barriers, or attempting to sneak around a lover's limits around safer sex. Refusing to deal with the realities of viruses and bacteria because of embarrassment is also unethical. A good slut speaks the truth, even if blushing furiously. Ethical sluts do not make promises they can't keep. If you are attracted to someone who is looking for a life partner and what you want is a lighthearted affair, or vice versa, you need to be honest about that, even if that means saying no thank you to sex until your feelings for each other are more on par. Mistakes can easily be made, sometimes accidentally and sometimes when we should have predicted that someone would get hurt. We have both made such mistakes. Now your older and wiser authors have discovered a couple of limits of our own. We do not share sex with anyone that we're not at least potentially interested in sharing sex with again. And we believe that anything worth doing is worth waiting for until the time is right. One hallmark of a skillful slut is to learn from one's mistakes and keep going. Dosey made such a mistake when she was very young and stupid. My long-term relationship had just broken up, and I was pretty broken up about it myself. I went out to the coffee shop in Greenwich Village and saw my recent ex in earnest conversation with a cute young thing who was not me. I felt horribly betrayed, lost, and worthless. Just then, a young man who had been attracted to me and for whom I had no serious feelings came up to speak to me. It somehow seemed appropriate to go with him and let him soothe my ruffled feathers, but I regretted it the next day when I found myself hurting his feelings and leaving him in the lurch. To further aggravate my guilt, I turned out that my ex was doing what that sweet girl was, beating his bosom about how horrible he felt about breaking up with me. We wound up getting back together. I have always felt that I took advantage of the young man who offered me his affection when I thoughtlessly took and then gave right back to him. I would have been kinder to have just said no. And that brings us to revenge fucking. It is truly nasty to arrange to have sex with one person to get back at another. It is truly nasty to arrange to have sex with one person to get back at another. To arouse one person's insecurities, jealousies, and other painful feelings on purpose is dishonorable. And to use another person as a puppet in your play is disrespectful and downright abusive. In psychopathology, being antisocial is defined as behaving with flagrant disregard for the rights, and we would add the feelings of others. We prefer to relate to sociable people. What do you do when someone in your intimate circle is not playing honestly? It helps if the people in your extended family have ways to talk about what is going on, to share feelings, to share experiences and feelings. If everyone is too ashamed to admit to having been misused by someone with an untrustworthy hidden agenda, then no one will have the information they need to protect themselves. There is no shame in having believed someone's lies, and most of us at some time or another have given our trust to someone who turned out not to be worthy of it. It is possible to fool an honest person, but we hope you have enough humility to learn from your mistakes and not get fooled twice. Jersey, you good? These goji things, they just go out. So it's just like, whatever. All these difficult scripts are about somebody not being honest and are also about somebody having sex while avoiding intimacy and emotional connection. When you are not telling the truth, you cannot be present. When you are not present, you cannot be connected to anyone else. And when you are not connected, how can you feel anything at all? By treating lovers as people and letting relationships take the shapes they want instead of the forms forced on them by the culture around them, ethical sluts can form relationships that last. That's the end of chapter 11. Okay, our final chapter, Embracing Conflict, chapter 16, 158. Nothing builds intimacy like shared vulnerability. We'll never discount all the wonderful things that we get from sharing love, laughter, and happiness and sex. But nothing deepens intimacy like the experiences we share when we feel flayed, when our skin's off, scared and vulnerable, and our lovers are there with us, willing to share in the scary stuff. These are the times that bring us to the closest together. Some people find it surprising to learn that a slut can experience overwhelming insecurities. But the truth is that sluts are just as nervous as anyone else, and skills to allay our anxiety were not taught to us in our cradles. Your own freedom might turn out to be a lot easier to accept than your partner's, or vice versa. Going out and staying home are separate functions, like eating and cooking, each with its own rewards, and each requires specific skills to accomplish. When problems arise, a good question to ask yourself is, what am I hoping to get out of this situation? Why are you doing all of this hard work to become a slut? The answer depends on your own individual situation, but for many of us, the payoff is our own freedom. And we have to learn to give freedom to our partners if we're going to give it for ourselves. Giving and getting freedom means we also need to have some good ways to deal with the inevitable conflicts that will arise when strong emotions are at stake. There are lots of good ways. Start by checking in with yourself on what you already know about conflict. You already have very strong ideas about this. You learned them, literally at your parents' knees, or perhaps while cringing in the corner. Studying the scripts you had to live by in your childhood will explain a lot about how you react to anger and conflict today. As a child, you had no choices. You had to fit in, somehow, to your family's script. How did you keep yourself safe? Was this never an issue? People who grew up in healthy families are often both easygoing and unafraid. The downside of growing up in an unusually healthy family is that it can be hard to understand why everybody else gets so scared. Most people, though, learn to hide from their own safety, or to fight back against themselves, or to become small and pathetic so that people would take pity on them. If you have any of these responses to conflict, defensiveness, rage, withdrawal, weepiness, whatever, it is certain that you develop them for a good reason. Once you understand how you learned your reflexes, more choices open up. Talk with your partners. What are their scripts? What's going on when A really wants to hear how B feels? Only B is trying to get safe by hiding. Maybe you each have different skills you learned about dealing with conflict. Maybe you could learn new ones from each other. Fighting fair. Thinking about how intimate bonds are cemented by sharing vulnerable feelings brings us to perhaps the ultimate act of intimacy, fighting. Many people believe that fighting between partners is to be avoided at all costs, but most relationship therapists disagree. Fights between partners appear to be a universal experience. Not many people actually enjoy them, but they seem to be necessary, a constructive element in the building of solid relationships and supporting growth and change, like the fires that make new growth possible in old forests. There has to be a way to communicate anger in a long-term relationship, and there has to be a way to struggle with disagreements. First, you may need to vent some anger, which may include feeling a safe and constructive way to experience it and release some of it. You'll probably need to make agreements ahead of time about how to do this. Not at your partner, not in front of the kids, not behind the wheel, not after getting high or drinking. Where is it safe for everybody for you to get really loud? The problem as we see it is not to avoid fighting, but to learn to fight in ways that are not destructive, physically, morally, or emotionally. A good fight is very different from abuse. In a good, clean fight, there is respect for safety and mutuality, so that both people get to fully express their feelings and come out the other end stronger and closer before, bonded by fire, as it were. The concept of fair fighting was first expounded by Dr. George R. Bach in his wonderful book, The Intimate Enemy: How to Fight Fair in Love and Marriage. Published in 1968, the book is terribly outdated, but the material on communication and detailed descriptions of constructive ways to share anger with a partner are priceless. You might also consider reading any of the books listed in further reading. Whatever book you choose, reading a book together with your partner will put you on the same page, with some of the same information and getting you to talk about how you communicate about what's important to you. Occasionally, you may decide to dismiss something that's bugging you because it seems too trivial. However, if that issue comes into your mind 3 times, it is obviously still bothering you. Perhaps you could start a conversation with, "There's a small thing that's been bothering me." So if feelings like to be heard, and anger is a feeling that can be very hard to hear, how can we vent anger without creating more trouble than we relieve? Win-win solutions. A good fight starts with the understanding that for a fight to be successful, everyone has to win. If one person wins a fight and another loses, the problem that caused the fight has not been resolved. It is naive to imagine that just because you've lost, you've given up your interest in whatever issue is at stake. When you feel overpowered, outgunned, or shouted down, you will be resentful, and the problem will go on being a problem. The only real way to win is to come to a solution where all parties concerned feel they have won. So in a good, clean fight, each person's feelings get heard and considered, and solutions are decided on by agreement, not rhetorical might makes right. We make a fight fair by agreeing on rules and limits, and by respecting everyone's right to express their feelings and opinions, including our own. It is usually helpful to schedule a time to fight and make an agreement to do so. It does not promote constructive hostilities if we waylay our partner in the bathroom or on the way out the door to work.
We need to schedule discussions at a time when we can give them our full attention. Scheduling fights has the added advantage that you can prepare for them, organize your thoughts, and know you have time when this particular issue will be dealt with. If you feel upset about the grocery bills on Tuesday and you know you have a date to fight about it on Thursday, it's pretty easy to put your stuff aside until then. Most people don't put their stuff aside very well when it seems that their issues will never get dealt with. What do you mean schedule a fight? Don't they just erupt like volcanoes? And when we have a fight, we are not likely to obey any rules or respect any limits, right? Aren't we talking about intense emotional outbursts? Well, yes, but we don't believe you can settle any issues when you are in an intense emotional state. When your feelings erupt, it is important to acknowledge them and pay attention. However awkwardly you may be expressing yourself, this is your truth. You obviously felt strongly about that, so it's an important truth. Triggering. How is it that we sometimes get triggered into very strong emotions, particularly at times of intimate conflict? We all do, it's not just you. Dosey recalls at 19 having panic attacks that seemed to come out of nowhere, until one day she noticed that something had moved fast near her face. Her father had been prone to sudden bursts of temper, accompanied by a hard slap across the face, and Dosey realized that whenever something moved suddenly near her face, even her lover, some part of her believed that she was about to get hit. Once she understood this, she became able to look around and see that nothing was threatening her in the present, and these panic attacks disappeared. New research into brain functioning has given us a lot of very useful information about how triggering works on the psychological level. We have an organ called an amygdala that does the job of remembering situations associated with strong emotions, both pleasurable and terrifying, and setting us into action. The most familiar form of this phenomenon is its greatest extreme, the flashbacks experienced by abuse survivors and combat veterans. The amygdala has a direct line to the pituitary gland and can set off our emergency response systems before our intellects can catch up. Adrenaline pours into our bloodstream. Norepinephrine floods our synapses. Our cells release all their sugars into our veins to give us energy to fight or to run away from tigers. Our entire system gets hijacked by chemical reactions, and everything instantly feels terribly, terribly urgent. Triggering is particularly common and intense in intimate arguments where all the old triggers we learned as children may get stimulated. To complicate matters, many of us have learned for one reason or another to suppress our feelings, so we are often triggered without even knowing what happened or why. The first thing to recognize is that nothing can get resolved in this adrenalized state. The flight or fight responses to adrenaline give us tremendous energy to survive a crisis, but not very much in the way of common sense. But two things happen during this physiological stress response that we can learn to use. The first is that we can occupy ourselves for 15 or 20 minutes without re-stimulating the stress reflex. Our physiology will return to normal and we will return to sanity. The process of taking a time out to get calm again is described below. Better yet, every time we succeed in spending that 15 minutes taking care of ourselves in the kindest way we can muster, we actually physically heal our amygdalas by growing more integrating fibers that deliver soothing neurotransmitters, and thus we increase our capacity to soothe ourselves in a crisis every time we manage it. So practice being kind to yourself. Here's how to take a time out when you or a partner gets triggered. Find a way to stop and separate. Then find a nurturing way to take care of yourself for about 15 minutes without re-triggering your emergency system until your adrenaline gets back to normal and you feel relatively calm. There are some agreements you will need to negotiate beforehand with each of your partners. First, everyone should understand that a timeout is absolutely not about whose fault this is. If what you're doing or talking about is what triggered the emergency overload, then both of you need to stop doing that to stop the adrenaline. Stopping can be difficult. Sometimes someone is almost certain to feel abandoned, cut off, interrupted, or unheard. Remember, this is for 15 minutes, not forever. Since you will probably need to be at least in separate rooms for a few minutes, a prior discussion as to what room each of you might want to be in is a good idea. Where are your computers, your books, your reading chairs? If someone likes to listen to music or watch television, are headphones needed to provide quiet for the other? If someone needs to go outside, it's useful to agree on a phone call within 20 minutes to check in and make sure everybody's all right. Some people like to agree on a safe word to call a timeout. Maybe timeout, or perhaps red, or maybe something silly that might help diffuse the anger. If you have kids and they are home, who will be responsible for them? Children may get nervous or want reassurance when the adults fight, which is in no way wrong. But they might feel needy or clingy at a time when you'd rather be free to focus on your own needs. Make an agreement to honor a timeout with silence. Trying to get in one more thought is likely to trigger another adrenaline release and prolong the problem.
You'll want to talk things over with your partner and to plan your initial practice timeout. Then look for an occasion to practice. Try calling a timeout over an issue that is only a little bit disturbing, just for practice. When you feel your most familiar uncomfortable emotions flaring up and you recognize you're being triggered, perhaps at the level of irritation or frustration, perhaps rage or grief, call a timeout. Strong emotions often appear very fast and can be hard to predict. So as soon as you remember the option when you start being flooded with feelings, call a timeout. Wrench yourselves out of the conversation and go to your agreed upon places. Do whatever you thought might be calming and not re-triggering. Take a few deep breaths and remember to exhale thoroughly. Reducing the carbon dioxide in your lungs will help the adrenaline subside. We like activities that occupy the mind. Neither of your authors has much luck with meditating when we're feeling triggered. If you can do it, go for it. But don't put yourself down if you can't empty your mind right now. We tend to turn to a novel or magazine, surfing the internet, solitaire music, maybe an old movie. Try to steer clear of things that create more adrenaline. Be careful of shoot-'em-up games, online arguments, or music with violent lyrics. Some people do very well with dancing out anger or raging, while others find it too stimulating. You will learn from experience what works for you. You might want to write out your feelings or draw them. The quality of the art is irrelevant. This is for you. One of your authors has journal sessions that start with frankly insane projections, complete with terrible accusations, and gradually grow into a remarkable non-judgmental investigation of what she and her partner were fighting about, sometimes ending with new insights about what upset her so much. After 15 minutes, check in with yourself. Are you feeling better? Your timeouts could take longer the first few times until you learn what works for you and gain some confidence in your process. When you're ready to come back together, do something easy and comforting. Go for a walk in the park. Get your favorite takeout, cook something together, watch a video in a companionable way, make an appointment to resume the discussion that triggered the timeout. The process of a timeout is seldom elegant, pretty, or even remotely resembling okay. We need to take timeouts when we are emotionally overwhelmed and definitely not at our best. Be ready to forgive each other for being human. Be ready to forgive yourself. The results are well worth it when you come back together, ready for harmony and understanding. iMessages. Good communication begins with everybody talking about their feelings long before they get to discussing the pros and cons of any solutions. Good communication is based on identifying our feelings, expressing them, and getting validation that our partner hears and understands what we are saying, whether or not they agree.
Emotions are not opinions, they are facts. Truths about what people are experiencing. Try speaking in sentences that begin with I feel. There is an enormous difference between you are making me feel so bad and I feel so bad. The I message is a pure statement of feeling and there's no accusation in it. When your lovers don't feel attacked and don't need to feel defensive, they are free to listen to what you're actually saying. Conversely, if your sentence starts with you, and especially with you always, your partner may well perceive an attack and respond defensively. The words I feel then need to be followed with an emotion, sad, mad, glad, angry, or a physical feeling like queasy, tense, wound up, shaky. Messages that begin with I feel that more often express a belief than a feeling, as in I feel that we should not be enjoying so much sex, or a covert you message like I feel that you are crazy. We are often tempted to describe our emotions in words that end in ed, as in I feel judged, attacked, betrayed. This is a covert you message. You are judging, attacking, betraying me. Most of us resent it when another person tells us how we feel. Whether or not they are correct, it is a violation of our boundaries when another person presumes to tell us what our inner truth is. Try asking a respectful question. How are you feeling right now? I'm wondering if you're sad. We can't ask our lovers to hold still while we sling accusations at them, using them as a target for our frustrations. That would be asking them to consent to being abused, and they would be right to resist. But we can ask them to listen to how we feel, because putting aside their own agendas for a few minutes and listening to our feelings is a doable task. To learn how to use I messages, try talking about an issue that is current for you without ever using the word you, and without talking about what anyone else is doing, but only about your own feelings. This technique takes a little practice, but is less difficult than it may seem at first. When it's your turn to listen to how your lover feels, put yourself in listening mode. Remember, feelings like to be heard and validated. So don't analyze or try to explain things, just listen. And you may be surprised to hear something you didn't know. You can learn how the world looks from someone else's shoes. You can appreciate that person's feelings, and you can validate that person's position and express understanding. Then the solutions can flow more freely and more naturally. There are no wrong solutions and no right ones, only the agreements that fit well with how we all feel. Exercise. This is a cute little exercise about a feelings dyad. The purpose of this exercise is to speak about your own feelings in such a way that your partner can hear you, and to listen carefully to your partner's feelings. Each person gets 3 minutes to speak while the other listens. Choose a time when you and your partners can spend half an hour to 45 minutes with no interruptions. Choose who will speak first and who will listen. Set a timer for 3 minutes. Feelings like to be heard. So when you are listening, all you are going to say are things that indicate listening, like okay, yes, I hear you and I understand. Read the I messages earlier in the chapter. Remember that we can ask our beloveds to listen to us talk about our feelings and how we are doing. It's not fair to ask anyone to stand still and be a target for accusations and blame. And so for this exercise, sentences beginning with you are out of bounds. Both of you should try to maintain eye contact during this exercise. Try this as a safe way to talk about jealousy. You can use it later to discuss any emotional situations. Here is a script you can follow. Listener, about jealousy, what would you like to tell me? Speaker, when I look inside, I find speaking as long as is comfortable. Listener, throughout, yes, I hear you, okay. Listener, when speaker stops, is there anything else you'd like to tell me about that? The speaker may continue or say, "No, I'm through for now," and the listener says, "Thank you." Listeners will often find themselves full of ideas, suggestions, and so on, which they need to keep to themselves. Put your own ideas aside for these few minutes and pay attention to what it's like to just focus on listening, because you may be full of responses to what you have heard. We suggest waiting a bit or doing something else before switching roles. These are intimate conversations. Show your appreciation to your partner for being brave enough to talk about these struggles. Hugs work great. Help is available. You don't have to do all this on your own. Many wonderful books, classes, workshops, and other resources are available. It's a good idea to put aside some time and energy to learn about communication and to do it with the person you're trying to communicate with. Many excellent weekend workshops focus on communication for couples. Some churches offer weekend marriage retreats. Some medical centers offer classes for couples in communication and anger management. Workshops and classes are worth attending even if they don't specifically address sluttery. We've never known a couple who went to a communication or intimacy workshop and didn't gain some good new skills and insights from it. Some workshops exist specifically to work on issues arising from non-monogamy. Don't hesitate to take these workshops, and remember that the facilitator has experience in creating safe environments to explore highly charged issues. Many couples repeat these workshops when a new issue has arisen in their lives. We encourage you to take a class or a workshop. If money is a problem, some workshops offer discounted admission in exchange for help with logistics and physical tasks. Just knowing that others struggle with some of the same issues that you do can help. Support, ideas, and information can also be found through in-person and online groups and tribes. See Chapter 19, Making Connection, for ideas on how to find these. A more expensive but still excellent option is to do some sessions with a couples counselor. In general, we recommend this as a second-level alternative after you've already done some classes and workshops, unless you have privacy concerns that make classes and workshops difficult for you. Screen any of these resources about whether they'll be accepting of your open relationship. Some old-fashioned psychologists and the leaders of some workshops and retreats may believe that your lust for many people is a symptom for psychological disturbance. You may not feel adequately supported in such a hostile environment. If you need help finding a sympathetic therapist or group, try asking your friends or checking polyamory counselor's name of your location in your favorite search engine. Most therapists now have websites where they list their skills and experience and sometimes about their philosophy. You can email them to ask about their experience in working with relationships that are non-monogamous. We strongly recommend that you investigate these types of help sooner rather than later. Just about everyone can use an occasional communication skills tune-up. That's why we're here. And if you wait until your relationship is in crisis, you'll face much harder work than if you've been practicing your skills all along. Time is your friend. Ooh, my robe almost came undone. Can't have that. Time is your friend. In some cultures, it is customary to wait several minutes after a person speaks before responding. It is rude and disrespectful to fail to think about what the person has said and to speak immediately would indicate that you have simply been waiting for the speaker to be quiet so that you can then attempt to change his or her mind. We recommend taking some time before responding to any serious communication, especially when it's important to the speaker. Often when you deliberately slow down communication, you'll hear something new. People frequently approach a disagreement as if it were urgent that it be resolved right away. They strive for a resolution within minutes of discovering that they don't agree about something that they have in fact never agreed on. But you've probably been living with that disagreement for a long time, and a little while more is not going to make a lot of difference. Thus, consider this strategy. Acknowledge the disagreement. Give each of you a chance to state your feelings using the principles you've learned in this chapter, and then take 2 days to digest what you've learned. When you return to discuss the disagreement, you will probably be in a much calmer mood. You may have a clearer understanding of what is important to you and an appreciation of what is important to your beloved and why. Thus, you may find yourself in a much better state to negotiate a solution that might make everyone happy. Or after 2 days, maybe it will have become so easy that you won't need a special script to come to an agreement. Remember, where emotions are concerned, time is your friend. Writing it out. Sometimes our feelings are so complicated that it seems impossible to deal with them in face-to-face conversation with our beloveds. Under such circumstances, you may want to write a thoughtful letter to let your honey know the entirety of your concerns in a measured way that can be absorbed and processed at their own pace. This correspondence isn't a substitute for actual conversation, but it can be a good precursor to it, a way to open up the discussion that may feel a bit safer. It is vital, however, that you send this letter only after you've had time to think about it. The downside to correspondence is that it can convey all the fine points of communication. It can't convey all the fine points of communication, facial expression, body language, and touch. The upside is, or should be, that a letter can be composed carefully without undue emotional overload. If you click send or drop the envelope into the mailbox before you've had a chance to think about its context, you're taking on all the downside without any of the upside. Start by writing a letter you're not going to send, expressing all your feelings and concern. Janet keeps letters like this in the drafts folder of her email program. Dosey writes them in her word processing program and pastes them into an email later. Write out all your feelings, letting go of any worries about how your partner may respond so you can express yourself fully. Then close the file and go do something else. Come back, add stuff, or edit things out for a couple of days. Check what you've written. Make sure you're owning your own stuff and using iMessages. We usually delete sentences that begin with the words, "you shithead." Later, when you read the message and imagine your friend truly understanding whatever you are disturbed about, it's time to send it. We hope we do not have to remind you that your blog, or your social media page, or your private email list, or a few dozen very intimate friends is not the place to rehearse this private correspondence. Struggle with it yourself, or if that seems impossible, perhaps you can run it past one trusted friend. Somehow, someone who would be acceptable to your lovers too, to make sure you're saying what you're trying to say. Dosey wrote such a letter recently to a lover of hers. She wrote the first draft at a time when she was terribly upset on a Friday. She was busy over the weekend, but managed to revisit her letter from time to time. By Monday, the issue was still there, but after some processing seemed more manageable, so she called her friend on the phone and they talked and resolved the issue quite easily and peacefully. The letter never got sent. Owning what's yours. When you are willing to own your distress, it becomes possible for your lover to comfort you, to offer you reassurance and love when things are hard. Even when you don't agree about how you are going to handle an issue, you can still exchange love and comfort. We recommend that everyone be open about asking for reassurance, love, hugs, comfort, and stuff like that. Many of us grew up in families where we were taught not to ask for what we needed, and if we did, we were scorned as only wanting attention. So what's wrong with wanting attention? Isn't there plenty? Remember about starvation economies. Don't shortchange yourself. You do not have to be content with little dribs and drabs of comfort, attention, support, reassurance, and love. You get to have all you want. You and your intimates can set yourselves up to share lots and lots and lots in the process. Learn how much more you have to share than you ever thought. So focus on abundance and create a relationship ecology rich in the good things of life, warmth and affection and sex and love. And that's the end of the chapter, guys. We did it. Just did those 3 chapters. Well, technically 4, because we read one with bell hooks. I think it's time. For me, to take a nap before this party. I have a Secret Santa party and then like a football party. One after the other. Gotta get my beauty rest now that I've done juiced my brain.